Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're tossing out all those superficial management tips and generic corporate advice. Instead, we're going to deconstruct the deep underlying psychological forces of how we direct others and how we ourselves are directed in life. We're pulling directly from a really fascinating source today, the psychology of human leadership, to uncover the raw mechanics of influence. So, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover what leadership actually is, actions, structures, and results, the illusion of weak management, the power of will, and finally, why followers resist. Part 1. What leadership actually is. All right, so to look at leadership completely objectively, we've got to strip away all our ethical expectations. Pause for just a second here. How do you intuitively define leadership? I mean, most of us probably think of it as, motivating people for the greater good, right? We attach this heavy ethical expectation to it. But our source material completely challenges this. It points out that real leadership exists even when the goals are, not morally good at all. Some of history's most destructive figures were functionally highly successful leaders. So if we take ethics completely out of the equation, what's actually left? Well, that brings us to this really stark, foundational definition. Leadership, at its absolute core, is the determination of movement. It's the intentional direction of time and action within a social environment. Think of it exactly like steering a physical object, like driving a car. You're taking something, or in this case, someone, and intentionally determining their trajectory through time and space. You are the one turning the wheel. Sometimes seeing the exact opposite of something makes the concept crystal clear. So, what is leadership not? Well, it's not a balloon floating freely. That's complete individual freedom, where you're just acting purely on your own. It's also not two people fighting. In an active conflict or war, your opponent is fiercely resisting your direction, right? And it's not an apple falling from a tree. Pure physics and gravity totally lack that intentional, human goal setting that defines true leadership. So the really crucial takeaway here is that true leadership relies on three essential characteristics. First off, it's a social phenomenon. It's all about getting others to follow. Second, it requires a meaning or a goal to pool those individual strengths toward. And third, and this is absolutely crucial, it requires the potential power to incur costs. Basically, if followers break ranks, the leader has to have the metaphorical stick to impose a penalty or the carrot to withhold a reward. You don't always have to actually use that power, but the potential of it must exist just to maintain that hierarchy. Moving on to part 2, actions, structures, and results. Okay, let's shift gears from theory to what we actually observe in real time. When you watch leadership unfold, you're really observing three distinct elements, chronologically. First up, you have leadership actions. This is that direct, observable influence, like a manager giving instructions or a politician arguing for a bill. Second, we have leadership structures. These are the pre-existing guardrails, stuff like company policies or laws, that restrict and guide those actions. And finally, leadership results. These are the eventual outcomes, which honestly, in long-term social projects, can actually be completely unpredictable. And there's a quote from the source that just brilliantly illustrates how all these elements tie together. It says, "Culture is the sum of the leadership structures followed." I mean, think about that for a second. The rules and the guardrails you follow today at your job or just in society in general are simply the legacy of past leadership actions. Leaders ensure their influence survives them by creating these structures, literally steering our behavior long after they've left the room. But creating a totally new structure from scratch, man, that requires immense confidence in the face of uncertainty. As the source material highlights, a leader absolutely must believe they can shape the future, even when there are zero guarantees. Think about the historical example of Barack Obama. His "Yes, we can" campaign slogan perfectly encapsulates this psychological necessity. Regardless of your politics, structurally speaking, any leader attempting to build new cultural guardrails has to project this firm, optimistic confidence that it's actually possible to direct movement into the unknown. All right, part 3, the illusion of weak management. Let's dive into a really fascinating, practical application of this in the workplace. Imagine a highly structured environment as a train on fixed rails. The rails completely restrict your freedom, sure, but they guarantee the direction. Now, compare that to a weak structure. It's kind of like driving an off-road vehicle through rough terrain. There are no rails. That off-road track demands immense, active, moment-to-moment leadership skill just to keep moving forward. And this reveals a totally counterintuitive truth about the business world. Organizations with incredibly tight, rigid structures, fixed processes, super strict role boundaries, they can actually survive surprisingly poor managers.
Honestly, I might explain a few bosses you've had in the past. Why does this happen? Well, because the pre-existing structure is doing all the heavy lifting. The manager isn't truly leading, they're essentially just taking a nap in the driver's seat while the tracks do the whole job.
Which brings us to part 4, the power of will.
We're going to shift our perspective inward now. And I have a deep psychological question for you. If leadership absolutely requires a goal, how do we actually know a leader has one? I mean, you can't physically see a goal, right? Goals are fundamentally just imagined ideals, visions, feelings about some unrealized future. You can see a person talking, you can see them waving their hands around, but you can't literally see the intent inside their head. So the answer is that we have to deduce it. It's like watching a person endlessly pushing a massive boulder up a steep hill. We only conclude a goal exists when we observe someone pushing through immense resistance. When we see a leader putting in extraordinary effort, battling pushback, and exhibiting this deep desire to overcome adversity, we intuitively go, okay, they are fighting for something. Basically, the greater the exertion we witness, the stronger we perceive their commitment to that invisible goal. And this hits right at the core of self-leadership, will over emotion. Our source argues that true leadership requires the will, the sheer deciding force to conquer base emotional urges, biological drives, and just the natural desire for comfort. To lead, you have to be able to commit to a goal even when the path to get there is emotionally miserable. And this is exactly why pure hedonists, people who are only interested in maximizing their immediate pleasure, can never be successful leaders. They simply can't generate the necessary self-conquest to keep pushing when things start to hurt. And finally, part 5, why followers resist. All right, let's completely flip the script for a second and look exclusively at the psychology of the people being led. For leadership to actually happen, the follower has to go on a psychological journey with 3 distinct steps. Step 1 is seeking context. This is where the follower actively place themselves in a hierarchy, like, say, signing an employment contract. Step 2 is orientation to the leader. They have to be open to actually hearing the leader's demands, which is usually based on trust. And step 3 is the assumption of foreign will. This is where the follower has to take the leader's goal and adopt it as their very own, which is what produces the exertion needed to actually get it done. So when leadership fails, it's pretty much always because this journey breaks down at one of 3 precise points. Point 1, fundamental rejection. This is when the person is just a perpetual rebel or a hermit who flat out refuses any hierarchical context entirely. Point 2, insufficient orientation. Here, they're willing to work, but they just lack trust in that specific leader. Or point 3, resistance to the specific goal. They trust the leader, they accept the job, but they strongly object to the specific task being asked of them today. Pinpointing exactly which of these 3 is happening is an absolute game changer when it comes to solving resistance. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a really powerful question to reflect on. Look at your own life through this lens of directed movement. What internal structures are currently guiding your behavior without you even realizing it? And ultimately, whose will are you choosing to follow today? Is it your own or someone else's? If you found this breakdown as fascinating as I did, I highly recommend checking out the full source text. There is so much more depth waiting for you. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.